The morning in Coldwater began as usual, with fog slowly rising from Central Lake, enveloping the small houses and narrow streets of the town of 12,000 people. Detective Maurice Thompson sat in his pickup truck in front of the police station, finishing the coffee his wife Rosalie had made for him. At 35, he looked like a typical small-town cop, strong, with a crew cut, and the tired eyes of a man who had seen enough to lose some of his illusions about human nature. Maurice had been with the Coldwater Police Department for 14 years, starting as a patrol officer right out of college. His father was a mechanic, his mother a housewife, and they raised their son in strict Christian traditions. Every Sunday, the Thompson family took their place in the third row of the Baptist church, where Pastor Jenkins preached about the importance of family values and moral principles. "Maurice, damn it, you're 5 minutes late again," came the familiar voice. Detective Nigel Chung knocked on the window of the pickup truck, smiling his usual easy smile. At 32, he was younger than Maurice, but he made up for it with a sharp mind and an incredible ability to find clues where others saw only dead ends. Nigel had moved to Coldwater 5 years ago from Indianapolis, officially to escape the hustle and bustle of the city, unofficially to start a new life in a place where no one knew his past. He was slim, of average height, with neatly trimmed hair and attentive brown eyes. His dress sense was more refined than most of the locals, always ironed shirts, good quality trousers, polished shoes. "I'm not late, I'm thinking," Maurice replied as he got out of the car. "Rosalie was up all night again with the baby. He's teething." "How are things at home?" Nigel asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. In their 5 years as partners, they had become more than just colleagues. They were true friends. Nigel often came over to the Thompsons for dinner and played with Maurice's children, 8-year-old Tommy and 2-year-old Emily. Rosalie often told her husband that Nigel was like a brother to their family. The usual stuff. "Tommy wants to play soccer, but I think baseball would be better for him. More of an American sport, you know." Maurice locked the car and headed for the station entrance. The Coldwater Police Department was housed in an old brick building constructed in the 1960s. Inside, it smelled of coffee, cigarettes, and that special smell that all police stations have, a mixture of disinfectants, old furniture, and human sweat. Their desks were lined up in a large room they shared with 4 other detectives. "Thompson, Chung, and my office," Sheriff Robert Hill called from his office. Hill was a large man with gray hair and a mustache who had been in charge of the station for 20 years. He valued order, discipline, and results. The sheriff's office wall was lined with photographs of every Coldwater sheriff since the 1920s and Hill's diploma from the police academy. His desk was littered with case files, empty coffee cups, and an old ashtray that he used as a pen holder after he quit smoking. "We have a case," Hill said, handing them a folder. "Last night, around 10 o'clock, Mrs. Carter on Oak Hill Drive reported a burglary. A TV, a computer, and some jewelry were stolen. Looks like the work of local junkies." Maurice opened the folder and scanned the report. "Carter's the house next to the park where the kids play, right?" "That's right. The mayor already called. He's concerned that crime is reaching the good neighborhoods. He wants us to catch the culprits quickly and quietly." Nigel studied the photos from the crime scene. "Strange. The break-in looks professional, but the choice of items stolen doesn't. Why take an old TV when there were more valuable things lying around?" "Maybe they were scared off," Maurice suggested. "Or they were looking for something specific," Nigel added. "I need to talk to Mrs. Carter in person and take another look around the house." Hill nodded. "Do what you have to do. Just keep it under control. The last thing we need is panic among the residents." Leaving the office, the partners headed for their desks. Maurice noticed that Nigel looked more tense than usual. "Everything okay?" he asked. Nigel hesitated for a second. "Yeah, it's just that sometimes I feel like I overcomplicate things." "That's your strength. Last month, if you hadn't noticed the inconsistency in the witness statements in the arson case, we would never have caught the real culprit." Nigel smiled, but it was a forced smile. "Thanks, Maurice. That means a lot." They drove to the Carter's house in the company car. On the way, Maurice talked about his plans for the weekend: a family barbecue, golf with a neighbor, going to church. Nigel listened, nodding occasionally, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Mrs. Carter's house was typical of the nice neighborhood in Coldwater, a two-story house with a neat lawn and a white fence. Mrs. Carter, a woman in her 60s, met them at the door. "Officers, thank God you're here. I haven't slept all night. What if they come back?" Nigel took out his notebook. "Mrs. Carter, tell us in detail what happened last night." "I was at my sister's until 9:30. When I came back, the front door was open. I knew right away that something was wrong. I always lock the door with 2 locks." Maurice examined the locks. There are no signs of forced entry. Either they had keys, or the door wasn't locked. "Impossible!" exclaimed Mrs. Carter. "I always lock the door." Nigel carefully examined the living room. The TV had indeed been stolen, but the DVD player, which was more expensive, was still there. The computer had been taken, but the printer and other equipment had been left behind. "Mrs. Carter, where do you keep your important documents?" he asked. "In the safe upstairs. Did they get in there?" Nigel and Maurice went up to the bedroom. The safe was locked, but there was dust around it, indicating that someone had been looking at it. "They tried to open the safe," Nigel said, "but they didn't have enough time or tools." "Drug addicts don't bother with safes," Maurice remarked. "It was something else." Nigel nodded. "I think we need to find out what exactly Mrs. Carter keeps in that safe." Back downstairs, they delicately questioned Mrs. Carter about the contents of the safe. In addition to the house documents and a small amount of cash, there were letters from her late husband and family photographs. "Nothing special," she said. "Just things that are dear to me as mementos." The partners exchanged glances. Something about this case wasn't right. On the way back to the station, Maurice said, "I think we need to check the neighborhood. Talk to the neighbors. Maybe someone saw something suspicious." Agreed. "And I want to check if there have been any other similar burglaries recently. There might be a pattern." Nigel seemed pensive. Maurice noticed that his partner had been like this a lot lately, distant, lost in his thoughts. But he decided not to bother him with questions. Everyone was entitled to their privacy. "By the way, we're having a barbecue on Saturday," Maurice said. "Rosalie asked if you were coming. Tommy wants to show you his new model airplane." Nigel hesitated before answering. "Yes, of course. I'll bring something." "Don't bring anything. Just come." They spent the rest of the day interviewing neighbors and studying surveillance camera footage from the neighborhood. By evening, they had a few leads, but nothing concrete. The criminals clearly knew what they were doing and were being careful. Before heading home, they sat at the station writing up a report on their work. Maurice noticed that Nigel checked his phone several times, but there were no messages. "Waiting for an important call?" he asked. "No, just a habit," Nigel replied, quickly putting his phone away. Morris shrugged. He knew Nigel was a secretive man, especially when it came to his personal life. In the 5 years they had been partners, he had never seen Nigel with a woman, let alone in a serious relationship. Sometimes he joked that his partner was too picky, but Nigel just smiled and changed the subject. That evening, Morris drove home to Cherrywood Street, a small 2-story house with blue shutters that he and Rosalie had bought right after they got married. The house needed some work, but it was their first home, and every corner was filled with memories. Rosalie met him at the door with a tired smile. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and often came home just as tired as her husband. "How's it going?" she asked, helping him take off his jacket. "New case, a burglary at the Carters. Nigel thinks something's not right." "Nigel always thinks something's not right," Rosalie laughed. "But he's usually right." Maurice nodded. His wife was right. Nigel was rarely wrong in his assumptions. That was why they worked so well together. "By the way, I invited him to the barbecue on Saturday," Maurice said. "Great, the kids will love it." After dinner, when the children were asleep, Maurice and Rosalie sat on the porch, watching the quiet streets of Coldwater. It was their ritual, a few minutes of silence at the end of the day when they could just be together. "Sometimes I think Nigel is lonely," Rosalie said. "He never talks about girls, never goes out with anyone." "Maybe he's just focused on his work," Maurice replied, although he sometimes wondered the same thing. "Or maybe he's too shy. I think he needs a good woman." Maurice hugged his wife. "Not everyone has to be married to be happy. But everyone deserves love, Rosalie said quietly. Saturday began with a barbecue at the Thompsons' house. Maurice woke up early to prepare the grill and cut the meat. Rosalie bustled about the kitchen, preparing salads and side dishes, while the children ran around the yard looking forward to the holiday. Nigel was supposed to arrive around 2 o'clock. "Dad, is Uncle Nigel definitely coming?" asked 8-year-old Tommy, helping his father arrange the charcoal in the grill. "Of course, son. He promised to see your new airplane." Tommy beamed. Nigel was his favorite uncle. He always found time to play with the boy, explain something interesting, or just listen to children's stories with sincere attention. At exactly 2 o'clock, Nigel's car pulled up to the house, a neat gray Honda Civic, which, like everything else in his life, was kept in perfect order. Nigel got out of the car with a bouquet of flowers for Rosalie and a small bag that clearly contained a gift for the children. "Nigel!" Tommy shouted, rushing toward him. "Look what I've got!" The boy showed off the new model fighter plane he and his father had assembled the night before. Nigel examined the plane carefully, asked a few questions about how the engines worked, and even suggested a small improvement to the design. "Rosalie, this is for you," he said, handing her the flowers. "And this is for the little ones," he added, handing over a bag of toys. "Nigel, I told you not to buy anything," protested Rosalie, but she was clearly pleased. "It's nothing," he replied, but Maurice noticed that his partner looked a little tense. The first 2 hours passed as usual. They grilled meat, talked about work, and watched the children play in the yard. Nigel seemed relaxed, joking with Tommy and helping Rosalie set the table. But Maurice, who had known him for 5 years, sensed that something was wrong. "How's the Carter case going?" Rosalie asked, setting plates on the table in the garden. "It's a strange case," Maurice replied. "It seems like a routine theft, but the details don't add up." "Nigel, what do you think?" she asked his partner. Nigel hesitated for a moment, as if his thoughts were far away. "I think we need to dig deeper. Check Mrs. Carter's financial situation, her connections, possible debts." "Debts?" Maurice was surprised. "She's a pensioner living alone." "That's exactly why we should check. Sometimes the quietest people hide the darkest secrets." There was a hint of bitterness in Nigel's voice that did not escape Maurice's attention. He was about to say something, but at that moment Nigel's phone rang. Nigel glanced at the screen, and his face changed. "Excuse me, I have to take this," he said, and walked to the far corner of the garden. Maurice couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see that Nigel was speaking quietly, almost in a whisper, and looked troubled. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes, after which Nigel returned to the table with a forced smile. "Everything okay?" Maurice asked. "Yes, just work stuff," Nigel replied, but his hands were shaking slightly as he picked up his glass of water. Rosalie, always sensitive to her guests' moods, tried to lighten the atmosphere. "Nigel, I recently met Mrs. Jenkins from church. She said her niece moved to town. She's a very nice girl who works at the library. Maybe you should meet her?" Nigel almost choked on his water. "What? No, I'm very busy with work right now." "All men say that," Rosalie laughed. "But life passes you by while you're working." "Rosalie's right," Maurice agreed. "You need to socialize more. Meet girls." Nigel stood up from the table so abruptly that he knocked over his chair. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." He quickly headed into the house, leaving Maurice and Rosalie puzzled. "What's wrong with him?" Rosalie asked quietly. "I don't know. He's been acting strange lately." Nigel didn't return for 10 minutes. Maurice began to worry and went to look for him. He found his partner in the living room, standing by the window and looking out at the street. "Nigel, are you okay?" Nigel turned around. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying. "Maurice, I need to tell you something." "Of course, anything." Nigel opened his mouth but then shook his head. "No, not now. Not here. Nigel, we're friends. You can tell me anything." "Can you?" Nigel asked quietly, and there was such pain in his voice that Maurice felt his heart tighten. "Of course. Whatever it is." Nigel looked at him for a long time as if trying to make a decision. Then he said, "I'm not what you think I am." "What do you mean? I can't date Mrs. Jenkins's niece or any other woman." Maurice frowned. "Why? Do you have a girlfriend?" "No, I don't have a girlfriend." Nigel took a deep breath. Maurice, I'm gay. The words hung in the air between them. Maurice felt the world around him slow down. He could hear his children laughing in the yard, the sounds of cooking coming from the kitchen where Rosalie was washing dishes, but it all seemed distant and unreal. What? He breathed. I'm gay, Maurice. I've always been this way. I moved to Coldwater because I wanted to start a new life, but I can't change who I am. Maurice took a step back. Memories of the last 5 years flashed through his mind. All the times he had joked that Nigel was too picky with women. All the times Nigel had avoided talking about his personal life. All the times something had seemed a little strange. Are you sure? He asked stupidly. Yes, Maurice, I'm sure. But you're... Maurice couldn't finish the sentence. There was no place for such things in his upbringing, in his faith, in his understanding of the world. I'm the same person I've always been, Nigel said quietly. I'm still your partner. I'm still the one who plays with your children and helps your wife in the kitchen. No, Maurice said, and his voice sounded strange. No, you're not the same person. Nigel turned pale. Maurice, you lied to me. You lied to me for 5 years. I didn't lie. I just didn't say anything. It's the same thing. Maurice raised his voice, then caught himself and lowered it to a whisper. You come into my house, you play with my children, and all this time you've been— What? What have I been doing all this time? Maurice couldn't answer. His head was a jumble of childhood memories of sermons in church, of his father's words about right and wrong, of fears he didn't even know he had. I need to think, he said finally. Maurice, please. No, I need time. Nigel nodded, and Maurice saw the pain in his eyes that made him feel even worse. I'll go, Nigel said. Yes, it's probably for the best. Nigel headed for the door, but stopped at the threshold. Maurice, what I told you doesn't change who I am as a police officer, or as a friend. I don't know, Maurice replied honestly. I don't know who you are anymore. Nigel left without saying goodbye. Maurice heard his car start and drive away, but he couldn't bring himself to go out into the yard and explain to his wife and children why their guest had suddenly disappeared. He sat in the living room for another half hour, trying to digest what he had heard. When he finally went out into the yard, Rosalie immediately noticed his state. Where's Nigel, and what's wrong with you? He had to leave. An urgent call. An urgent call? But he's not on duty today. I don't know, Rosalie. Maybe he was on duty. She looked at her husband intently. Maurice, what's going on? Nothing. Just tired. The rest of the day passed in painful silence. The children asked disappointedly when Uncle Nigel would be back, but Maurice didn't know what to tell them. Rosalie tried to question him, but he avoided the conversation. In the evening, when the children were asleep, they sat on the porch, but the usual closeness was gone. Maurice thought about Nigel's words, trying to understand what he was feeling. Disgust, betrayal, fear, all of the above. Maurice, I know when you're hiding something, Rosalie said. What happened with Nigel? Maurice looked at his wife. She deserved the truth, but he wasn't ready to tell her. Not now. We had a fight, he said. About what? Personal differences. What kind of differences could be serious enough to destroy a 5-year friendship? Maurice couldn't answer. He got up and went into the house, leaving his wife alone on the porch. On Sunday morning, the Thompsons went to church as usual. Pastor Jenkins preached about the importance of family values and how important it was to protect children from the evil influences of the modern world. Maurice listened to every word, and every word echoed with pain in his heart. After the service, Mrs. Jenkins approached them. Maurice, where's your partner? He usually comes with you. He was busy today, Maurice replied. That's a shame. I wanted to introduce him to my niece Emily. She's such a lovely girl. I don't think that's a good idea, Maurice said more sharply than he meant to. Mrs. Jenkins looked at him in surprise but said nothing. On Monday morning, Maurice arrived at work with a heavy heart. Nigel was already there, sitting at his desk studying the Carter case files. He looked up when Maurice entered but didn't say a word. Good morning, Maurice said stiffly. Good morning, Nigel replied. A wall of awkwardness that had never been there before came between them. They worked in silence, each focused on his own tasks, but the atmosphere was so tense that the other detectives began to notice. "Thompson, Chung, what's the latest on the Carter case?" Sheriff Hill asked around noon. "We checked the neighbors," Maurice replied. "No one saw anything suspicious. What about the surveillance camera footage?" "Nothing concrete either," Nigel added. "But I think we should dig deeper into Mrs. Carter's past." "What past? She's just a regular retiree." "Maybe, but the theft was too targeted. They were looking for something specific." Hill nodded. "Do what you think is necessary. Just get results fast." After the sheriff left, silence fell between the partners again. Nigel tried several times to speak, but Morris responded with one-word answers or no response at all. By the end of the day, it was clear that their partnership was in crisis. They could no longer work as a team, and it was affecting the investigation. "Maurice," Nigel said as they were about to leave for home, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About what's going on between us. About how it's affecting our work." Maurice looked at him. "I'm not ready to talk." "When will you be ready?" "I don't know." Nigel nodded, sadness in his eyes. "I understand. But Maurice, I hope that someday you'll realize that I'm still the same person." "No," Maurice said. "You're not the same person. And neither am I." A week had passed since Nigel's confession, and the atmosphere at the Coldwater Police Department had become unbearable. Maurice and Nigel barely spoke to each other, limiting their interactions to work-related matters. Other detectives began to notice the coldness between the once inseparable partners. "Hey, what's going on with you two?" Detective Rick Palmer asked during lunch break. "You used to be like brothers." "Nothing," Maurice muttered, not looking up from his sandwich. Nigel silently got up and left the break room. Palmer watched him go, puzzled. "Seriously, Maurice, what's going on?" "Just a work disagreement," Maurice replied, but even he knew how unconvincing that sounded. The Carter case was moving slowly. Without normal interaction between partners, the investigation was stalled. Maurice preferred to work alone, while Nigel spent more and more time at his computer, studying documents and records. On Wednesday, Nigel finally found a lead. While digging through Mrs. Carter's financial records, he discovered some strange bank transactions, large deposits that had appeared every few months over the past 2 years. "Maurice," he called, but his partner pointedly did not turn around. "Maurice," Nigel repeated louder. "What?" Maurice finally replied, without looking up from his papers. "I need to show you something important." Maurice reluctantly approached Nigel's desk. There was barely half a meter between them, but it seemed like a chasm. "Look at these bank statements," Nigel said, pointing to the computer screen. "Every 3 or 4 months, large sums of money are deposited into Mrs. Carter's account. $5,000 to $7,000. Morris frowned, despite his reluctance to cooperate. "Where from?" "That's the problem. All the transfers are made in cash through different banks. No trace of the sender. Maybe it's an inheritance or gifts from relatives. Mrs. Carter has no living relatives except a sister who is barely making ends meet herself." Nigel turned to Maurice. "It looks like regular payments, maybe blackmail." Maurice had to admit the logic of this assumption. "You think Mrs. Carter was blackmailing someone?" "Or the other way around. She was being blackmailed, and the money was payment for her silence." "But then why was she robbed?" "Maybe something went wrong. Maybe she refused to pay, or the blackmailer decided to take everything at once." It was the first normal work conversation they'd had in a week, but the tension was still there. Maurice felt uncomfortable standing so close to Nigel, knowing what he now knew. "We need to talk to Mrs. Carter again," Nigel said. "I'll talk to her myself," Maurice replied quickly. "Maurice, we're partners. We have to work together." "Have to?" Maurice raised his voice, then looked around and lowered it. "I'm not sure we're still partners." The pain in Nigel's eyes was so obvious that Maurice almost regretted his words. Almost. "Fine," Nigel said quietly. "Talk to her yourself. I'll keep looking over the financial documents." Maurice drove to Mrs. Carter's house alone. On the way, he tried to focus on the case, but his thoughts kept returning to Nigel. How could he have hidden such an important part of himself for so long? How could he have pretended to be a normal person all these years? Mrs. Carter greeted him warily. "Officer Thompson, any news on my case?" "I have a few questions I need answers to," Maurice said, as he walked into the living room. "Mrs. Carter, could you explain the large cash deposits into your account over the past 2 years?" The elderly woman's face changed. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Every few months, large sums of cash have been deposited into your account. Where did this money come from?" Mrs. Carter sat down in an armchair, suddenly looking much older than her years. "These are private matters. Mrs. Carter, this money may be connected to theft. I need to know the truth." There was a long silence. Finally, Mrs. Carter spoke in a trembling voice. "It was my son." "Your son? But you said you didn't have any children." "I said I lived alone. That's the truth." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Danny is my boy. He got into trouble many years ago. Drugs, bad company. I thought he was dead. But he's alive?" "Yes. 2 years ago, he reappeared in my life. He said he wanted to turn his life around, start over, but he needed money for treatment, to start a business." Maurice felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "And you gave him money?" "He's my only child. No matter what he does, he's still my son." "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He never said where he lives. He just showed up when he needed money." "Mrs. Carter, he may be the one who robbed your house. He may have been looking for money or documents in the safe." "No!" she cried. "Danny wouldn't steal from his own mother." But Morris heard the doubt in her voice. She too was beginning to understand what had happened. "I need his full name and any information that will help me find him." With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Carter gave Maurice all the information she had about her son, Daniel Carter, 34 years old, last known address in Indianapolis, a criminal record for drug possession and petty theft. Back at the station, Maurice found Nigel at his desk studying the new documents. "I found our suspect," Maurice said. "Daniel Carter, the victim's son." Nigel looked up. "Son?" She said she didn't have any children. She lied, or rather, she left something out. The guy's a drug addict with a criminal record. She gave him money regularly. "That explains the financial transactions," Nigel nodded. "He knew about the safe and thought he'd find more money there." "Exactly." Morris put the documents on the desk. "I need to run a check on him and find out his current location. I can help." "No," Maurice interrupted sharply. "I can handle it myself." Nigel pressed his lips together but said nothing. He stood up and walked over to his desk. They worked in complete silence for the rest of the day. Maurice found Daniel Carter's last known address and coordinated with the Indianapolis police to have him arrested. Nigel filed paperwork on other cases, glancing occasionally at his former partner. At the end of the workday, Sheriff Hill approached Maurice. "Thompson, I need to talk to you, in my office." In the sheriff's office, Maurice felt uncomfortable. Hill was a fair boss, but strict. "Maurice, what's going on between you and Chung?" "Nothing special, Sheriff." "Don't lie to me. You two barely speak to each other. The other detectives have noticed. It's affecting the work of the entire department." Maurice remained silent. "You were the best team in the department," Hill continued. "In 5 years, you've solved more cases than any other pair of detectives. What happened?" "Personal differences." "What kind of differences are so serious that they could destroy a professional partnership?" Maurice couldn't explain. How could he tell his boss that he had discovered his partner's sexual orientation and couldn't accept it? It would sound petty and prejudiced. "We just have different views on some things." Hill looked at him intently. "Maurice, I've known you for 14 years. You're a good cop and a decent man. But if your personal problems are interfering with your work, I'll have to take action." "What kind of action?" "Possibly separating you? Assigning you new partners?" "Maybe it would be for the best," Maurice said, although the words caused him unexpected pain. "Think about it at home. I want a clear answer from you tomorrow morning. Either you sort out your problems and get back to work, or I'll change the teams." At home, Maurice was gloomier than usual. He barely spoke to Rosalie and the children at dinner. Tommy asked about Uncle Nigel several times, but Maurice only muttered something vague. "Maurice, that's enough," Rosalie said when the children had gone to watch TV. "You've been walking around like a wet dog for a week. What happened between you and Nigel?" I don't want to talk about it. Don't want to or can't. Maurice, we've been married for 10 years. I know when you're hiding something. Maurice looked at his wife. Rosalie was a good woman, a loving mother, a faithful companion. But she had been raised just as conservatively as he had. How would she react to the truth? Nigel isn't who we thought he was, he finally said. What do you mean? Maurice hesitated, then decided. He's gay, Rosalie. His wife's face changed. What? He confessed to me last Saturday. He said he's always been this way. Rosalie sat down as if her legs couldn't hold her up. Nigel is gay? But how can I mean He was pretending. All these years he was pretending to be a normal person. My God. Rosalie covered her mouth with her hand. And he's been coming to our house all this time, playing with our children. That's what worries me. Maurice, do you think he's done anything inappropriate with Tommy? I don't know. I don't know anything else about him. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Rosalie said, Maybe we should talk to Pastor Jenkins? Maybe we should. Poor Tommy, he was so attached to Nigel. Maybe it's for the best that everything came out now. That night, Maurice couldn't sleep for a long time. He thought about the sheriff's words, his wife's reaction, how much his life had changed in 1 week. Nigel was right about one thing. He really was the same person. But that didn't matter to Maurice anymore. The trust was broken, and he didn't know if it could be repaired. Thursday began with an unexpected call from Indianapolis. Daniel Carter had been arrested in his apartment, where the police found items stolen from his mother's house. The case was closed, but Maurice felt no satisfaction from the successful investigation. Good work, Sheriff Hill said when Morris reported the suspect's arrest. Now about your situation with Chung. What's your decision? Maurice looked across the room at Nigel, who was intently studying documents related to the new case. His partner had lost weight in the last few days, and dark circles had appeared under his eyes. I think it would be better if you split us up, Maurice said. Hill nodded regretfully. Understood. Starting Monday, Chung will work with Williams, and you'll be assigned a new partner from the patrol. Okay. Morris, I hope you realize you're losing one of the best detectives in the state. I do. But inside, Morris felt not regret, but a strange sense of relief. Finally, it would all be over. No more pretending that nothing had changed. Around noon, Nigel approached his desk. Morris, I need to talk to you, alone. About what? Please, it's important. Morris reluctantly agreed. They walked out to the parking lot behind the station, where the police usually smoked. There was no one else there. I know Hill divides us, Nigel began. And I understand why. Then why are we having this conversation? Because I can't leave it like this. Maurice, we've been friends for 5 years. Real friends. Doesn't that mean anything? It did, before I found out who you really were. I'm the same person. Nigel raised his voice, then looked around and lowered it. Nothing has changed in me except that now you know the truth. You lied to me. For 5 years you let me think, what? That I'm normal? Maurice, listen to yourself. Don't tell me what to listen to. Then what? What do you want from me? For me to apologize for who I am? Maurice felt anger rising within him. I want you to stay away from my family. What? You heard me. No more dinners, no more games with my kids. I don't want you around them. Nigel turned pale. Maurice, you can't be serious. What am I supposed to think? How can I trust you with my children, knowing what you are? What am I? Say it, Maurice. Say what you really think. You're a pervert, Maurice blurted out, and the words hung in the air between them like a blow. Nigel recoiled as if he had been physically struck. Maurice, and I don't want my children around a pervert. I would never, ever hurt children. Yours or anyone else's. How do I know? I don't know who you are anymore. You do. Nigel took a step closer. You know me better than anyone else. We worked together for 5 years, shared everything. Not everything, obviously. I didn't tell you about this part of my life because I knew how you would react, and I was right, wasn't I? Maurice felt something break inside him. All the anger, all the fear, all the disappointment of the last few days came pouring out. Yes, you were right because it's wrong, Nigel. It's hurtful and wrong, and I don't want it to be part of my life. It's part of me. Then you shouldn't be part of my life. Nigel stopped, and Morris saw such deep pain in his eyes that for a moment he felt remorse, but only for a moment. Okay, Nigel said quietly. If that's how you feel, then I won't impose myself on you anymore. Okay? But Maurice, I want you to know one thing. Every moment of our friendship was real. Every laugh, every conversation, every time I played with your children, it was all from the heart. None of it was a lie. It was all a lie, because you lied about who you are. Nigel shook his head. No, Maurice. The only lie here is your belief that people like me can't be good people. He turned and walked toward the parking lot exit. Where are you going? Maurice called after him. The workday isn't over yet. I'm taking the day off, Nigel replied without turning around. I need some time to think. Maurice watched his former partner walk away and felt a strange emptiness. It was a victory, wasn't it? He had gotten what he wanted. So why did he feel so bad? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Maurice tried to focus on his work, but his thoughts kept returning to his conversation with Nigel, to the pain in his eyes, to the way he said, every moment of our friendship was real. At 6 o'clock, Maurice was about to leave for home when his phone rang. It was Nigel. Maurice, I need to give you something back. Can you meet me at the old warehouse on Riverside, where we caught Johnson last year? What do you want back? Your spare jacket. It's in my car from that job in January. Maurice remembered. Nigel had borrowed his jacket on a rainy day when they were working outside. Can't you bring it to the station tomorrow? I won't be at the station tomorrow. I took a few days off. Maurice hesitated. The last thing he wanted was another painful encounter with Nigel. Please, Maurice. I don't want to leave this unfinished. All right. I'll be there in half an hour. The old warehouse was located in an industrial part of town near the river. It was a deserted place, especially in the evening. Maurice parked at the main entrance and saw Nigel's car. Nigel was standing by the water with his back to the warehouse. He heard Maurice's footsteps and turned around. Thanks for coming. Where's the jacket? Nigel pointed to the hood of his car where Maurice's neatly folded police jacket lay. Maurice walked over and picked up the jacket. Is that everything? Not quite. Nigel took a deep breath. Maurice, I've been thinking a lot since we talked, and I realized there's something else I need to tell you. Nigel, we've already discussed everything. No, we haven't. You see, all this time I thought the problem was that I hadn't told you the truth. But the real problem is that I did. Maurice frowned. What do you mean? I mean, we were best friends for 5 years when you didn't know. And now that you do, we can't even be in the same room together. That doesn't say anything about me, Maurice. It says everything about you. Are you blaming me? I'm telling you the truth. You can't accept me for who I am because your religion, your upbringing taught you to hate people like me. But you know what? I'm not going to apologize for who I am. Not to you, not to anyone else. Maurice felt the anger rising in him again. So it's my fault? I'm supposed to just accept your lifestyle? It's not a lifestyle, Maurice. It's who I am. It's a choice. No, it's not a choice. Nigel took a step closer, his voice filled with rage. You think I chose to be this way in a world where people like you look at me like I'm a pervert? You think I chose a life of fear and secrecy? Then why don't you change? Because you can't change who you were born to be. They stood face to face, both breathing heavily with emotion. There were tears in Nigel's eyes. You know what hurts the most? He said quietly. It's not that you reject me. It's that you think I could hurt your children. Tommy and Emily are like my niece and nephew. I'd die before I let anyone hurt them. But you could. What? What could I do? Say it, Maurice. Say what you really think. You could corrupt them. Nigel looked at him with such disgust that Maurice felt dirty. You really think that being gay means you're a pedophile? I don't know. Yes, you do. Somewhere deep down, you know it's not true. But your fear is stronger than your mind. Don't lecture me. Then don't act like an ignorant fool. Something snapped in Maurice's mind. All the anger, all the fear, all the disgust burst out. He pushed Nigel in the chest. Shut up! Nigel stepped back, but didn't look away. Or what? What are you going to do, Maurice? I said shut up. Maurice pushed him again harder. Nigel stumbled but stayed on his feet. "Are you going to hit me?" Nigel asked. "Will that solve your problems?" "Shut up, shut up, shut up!" Maurice shouted, pushing Nigel toward the edge of the water. "Maurice, stop!" But Maurice couldn't stop. All the emotions of the last few days, all the anger and disgust erupted into physical rage. He grabbed Nigel by the shoulders and pushed him with all his might. Nigel lost his balance and fell, hitting his head on the stone edge of the embankment. The sound of the blow was horribly hollow. Suddenly, everything went quiet. Maurice stood breathing heavily, staring at Nigel's motionless body. Blood slowly spread from under his head, staining the water dark red. "Nigel?" Maurice called in a trembling voice. There was no answer. Maurice moved closer and leaned over the body. Nigel's eyes were open, but empty. There was no anger or pain on his face, only surprise. "Nigel, get up," Maurice whispered. "Please get up." But Nigel didn't get up. He would never get up again. Maurice crouched down, unable to believe what had happened. This couldn't be happening. It was just an argument, just a push. People don't die from a push. But Nigel was dead. Maurice's first thought was to call an ambulance. His second was that it was too late. His third thought was that his life was over. He had killed his partner, his friend. Maurice looked around. The warehouse was empty. There were no cars on the road. No one had seen what happened. Maybe he could... No, he couldn't do that, but then what? Prison, losing his job, his family, everything that mattered in his life? His hands were shaking as he took Nigel's phone out of his pocket. He deleted all the messages and calls from the last few days, including his call from an hour ago. Then he threw the phone into the river. He dragged Nigel's body deeper into the water, where the current could carry it away. Maybe it would look like an accident. Maybe no one would ever know the truth. Maurice washed the blood off the rocks and made sure he left no traces. His jacket was in the car, proof of why he had come here. An hour later, he drove away, leaving Nigel in the dark water of the river. The next morning, a fisherman found the body. By noon, Detective Lisa Williams had begun investigating the murder of Detective Nigel Cheng. "Looks like a robbery murder," she told Sheriff Hill. "The wallet's gone, no phone either." "Or he knew the killer," Hill replied grimly. "Nigel was careful. He wouldn't have gone to a place like that with a stranger." Maurice stood nearby, feigning shock and grief. Inside, he was burning with guilt and fear. Nigel's funeral took place on a cold, rainy day. Maurice stood by the coffin in his police uniform, accepting condolences from colleagues and the few friends of the deceased. Every handshake, every word of sympathy burned him inside. "He was a good man," said Nigel's elderly neighbor. "He always helped with the shopping and looked after my cat when I was away." Maurice nodded, unable to say a word. Rosalie stood next to him, holding his arm, thinking she was supporting her grieving friend. The children had stayed at home. Maurice said they were too young for a funeral. Detective Lisa Williams watched the proceedings with professional attention. She was 29 years old and had recently transferred to Coldwater from Chicago after her divorce. She was an experienced investigator with a sharp mind and no preconceptions that might interfere with an objective investigation. "Strange," she said to Sheriff Hill as they stood away from the crowd. "What's strange?" "In 5 years here, Chung has made so few personal connections. Almost everyone at the funeral is a co-worker. He was a private man. Or he was hiding something." Lisa looked at Maurice. How long had they been partners? 5 years. The best team in the department. And they never had any conflicts? Hill hesitated. Well, there had been some tension between them lately. What kind of tension? Personal differences. Thompson said they had different views on some things. Lisa made a mental note. After the service, she approached Maurice. "Detective Thompson, I need to talk to you about the investigation. Maybe tonight?" "Sure. Anything that will help find Nigel's killer." "Okay. Come to the station at 7. That evening, Maurice sat in the interrogation room, trying to look like a grieving colleague rather than a suspect. Lisa turned on the tape recorder. "This is an informal conversation, but I'm recording for the record. Tell me about your relationship with Detective Cheng." "We were partners for 5 years, good friends." "Sheriff Hill said there had been tension between you lately." Maurice swallowed. "Minor work disagreements. Nothing serious." But serious enough that Hill was planning to split you up? Shit. She already knew about that. We just got tired of working together. Sometimes partners need a break. When was the last time you saw Detective Chung alive? On Thursday at the station. He left early, said he was taking the day off. And on Thursday evening? Or Friday? No, I was home with my family. Lisa looked at him intently. Detective Thompson, I've reviewed Chung's phone records. His phone was found in the river, but the phone company provided the data. On Thursday at 6:15 p.m., he called you. The call lasted 2 minutes. Maurice's heart began to beat faster. Yes, he called. He wanted to return my jacket. What jacket? His spare uniform jacket. He borrowed it a few months ago. And where did the handover take place? It didn't. He said he'd bring it back on Monday. But Monday never came. Maurice nodded, feigning sadness. Detective Thompson, I need you to help me understand the victim's personality. Did Chung have a girlfriend? No. Nigel preferred to be alone. A boyfriend? Maurice tensed. What? Did he have a boyfriend? A male lover? I don't know what you're talking about. Lisa leaned forward. Detective Thompson, I found things in Chung's apartment that indicate he was homosexual. Magazines, photographs, personal correspondence. You really didn't know about this? Maurice felt sweat beading on his forehead. No, if that's true, he never said anything to me. Interesting. 5 years of partnership and such an important detail slipped your notice. Nigel was a private man. Or you didn't want to know. Lisa paused. How do you feel about homosexuals, Detective Thompson? That's irrelevant. It could be, if your partner hid his orientation because he was afraid of your reaction. I couldn't have told Nigel anything. Could have? You're a religious man, Detective. You go to a Baptist church where Pastor Jenkins often preaches against homosexuality. How would you have reacted if you found out your best friend was gay? Maurice stood up. I won't answer any more questions without a lawyer. That's your right. But think about it, Detective Thompson. If you really want to find your friend's killer, you need to help me understand who he really was. At home, Maurice was gloomier than usual. Rosalie tried to comfort him, thinking he was just mourning his friend. How did the conversation with Detective Williams go? She asked. She asks a lot of questions. That's her job. She asked about Nigel's personal life. Rosalie froze. She knows? It seems so. She found evidence in his apartment. My God, so it's true. He really was like that. Maurice nodded, unable to say the words aloud. Maurice, you didn't tell her we knew, did you? No, but she's suspicious, smart. What are we going to do? Nothing. We didn't know anything before he died. That's our story. 3 days later, Lisa returned to Maurice with more questions. Detective Thompson, I checked the surveillance footage in the warehouse area. Your car was spotted on Riverside Drive on Thursday evening at 6:45 p.m. Maurice felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. That's impossible. The camera at the gas station clearly recorded the license plate number. What were you doing in an industrial area? I stopped by to pick up my jacket. But you said the meeting didn't happen. He didn't show up. I waited and left. How long did you wait? About 10 minutes. Did you try calling him? He didn't answer his phone. Lisa took out another folder. These are the autopsy results. Detective Chung died from a head injury consistent with a fall onto a hard surface. But there's an interesting detail. Bruises on his shoulders indicate that he was pushed. Maybe he tried to fight off a mugger. Possibly. But a mugger would have taken the watch. The expensive watch was still on the victim's wrist. Maurice didn't know what to say. Detective Thompson, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Did you kill Nigel Cheng? What? No. He was my partner, my friend. Was he? Or did you find out about his sexual orientation and couldn't accept it? Are you accusing me of murder because I'm a religious man? I'm accusing you based on evidence. Your car was at the scene of the crime. You had a motive. You couldn't accept the truth about your partner, and you had the opportunity. Maurice stood up. Without a lawyer, I won't say another word. Fine, but think about it. The Chung family deserves the truth, and deep down, you know it's the right thing to do. That night, Maurice couldn't sleep. He lay next to Rosalie and felt the walls closing in on him. Lisa was too good a detective. Sooner or later, She would find enough evidence. In the morning, he was arrested at home, in front of his wife and children. Maurice Thompson, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Nigel Chung. You have the right to remain silent. Tommy cried, clinging to his father's leg. Rosalie stood in the doorway, covering her mouth with her hands in horror. "Dad, don't go!" the boy cried. "Everything will be fine," Maurice lied, knowing that nothing would ever be fine again. In his holding cell, Maurice finally admitted the truth to himself. He had killed an innocent man out of fear and prejudice. Nigel had been right. The problem wasn't that he had told the truth, but that Maurice couldn't accept it. 2 days later, a court-appointed lawyer came to see him. "Detective Thompson, they have serious evidence. Your car was at the scene of the crime, you had a motive, and your colleagues testified about the conflict between you and the victim. What do you recommend?" "Honestly, a deal with the prosecutor. Plead guilty in exchange for a reduced charge of manslaughter. How long is that? 10 to 15 years, instead of life for first-degree murder." Maurice closed his eyes. Tommy would be a grown man when he got out. Emily wouldn't remember him. "I need to think about it." That night in his cell, Maurice thought about Nigel. How he played with the kids, how he laughed at silly jokes, how he always had his partner's back. Nigel was the best person he knew, and he killed him for being honest with him. In the morning, he told his lawyer, "I'm ready to confess." The trial was quick. Maurice pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Rosalie filed for divorce a month after the verdict. The children moved in with her parents in another state. On his last day in Coldwater, before being sent to prison, Maurice was taken to the cemetery to say goodbye to Nigel. Lisa Williams accompanied him in handcuffs. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked. "Because I think you have something to say to him." Maurice stood in front of a simple granite headstone. "Nigel Cheng, detective friend, good man." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You were right. You were always right." The wind rustled the leaves above the grave, and for a moment Maurice thought he heard Nigel's voice. "I know, my friend, I know." Lisa led him back to the car. "Detective Thompson, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you could go back, what would you change?" Maurice looked at the cemetery one last time. "Everything. I would change everything." In prison, Maurice became a different person. He realized that his upbringing had taught him to fear differences instead of accepting them. Every night before he went to sleep, he thought about Nigel. Not about that last conversation by the river, but about the good times. He thought about the laughter, the friendship, and the man who had trusted him enough to reveal the most important secret of his life. A memorial plaque was erected in Coldwater in honor of Detective Nigel Chung. It was engraved with a simple inscription, "Served with honor, loved with an open heart."